Welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping day 2 of the Women's World Championship happening in Česká Budějovice, Czechia. So we'll hop into today, of course, with the scores from today's games, starting with a 5-2 victory for Japan over Norway. Now, this was an interesting game where we really had both teams surprise us here. And we'll start with Japan, and one of the things for me for Japan coming into this tournament would be, are they going to be able to score? And that was one of the biggest question marks I had, even doing the prediction video, whatever it might be, whether it was even in the preview. When we were talking about Japan, it was about whether or not they could find the back of the net in this tournament. We think back to last year where their very first game was against China and they ended up losing because they couldn't find the back of the net. And they're playing a weaker opponent in Norway, and sure enough, you saw what they were able to do, putting up 5 goals against Norway. And as much as, yes, it's a good start for Japan, I still think one of the things that really they can take from this game is the fact that we're a team that can score. And for Japan, that's a big factor, especially when you think about how well they've played, especially in years past at this tournament. They've always been a team that have controlled the pace of play, been able to really make plays happen. They've just always struggled finishing those plays and finding the back of the net. But this time, at least early in this tournament, through one game, they've seemed to be able to find the back of the net. So that's one thing I want to keep an eye on as this tournament goes onward is Japan able to continue that goal-scoring success? Because if they are, one thing I'll say is watch out, because Japan is a team at this tournament that I think could even contend with a team like a Sweden. And especially in Group B, where as much as I don't expect them to beat teams like Czechia or Finland in that eventual quarterfinal matchup, I do think Japan is a team that can very well win Group B if they play the way that they continue to play throughout the last few years and then find the back of the net. So with that in mind, a very good start today for Japan, obviously picking up the 3 points, but also the way they played that game for me, and even more so finding the back of the net more prominently. I think that's something they can very much take into these next couple games as they look to try and top Group B and get an easier opponent in the quarterfinal. For Japan, that's what I'm looking for. They played well today, a good start for them. As for Norway, a team coming into this tournament, not expected to do a whole lot. They played a real good game today, holding Japan close throughout the entire game, and they had plenty of chances to capitalize on their opportunities. And we just saw it today where they weren't able to bury them, but very well this game could have been a lot closer than it was. And for Norway, I think that's a big positive. You think about the team that Japan is and how quick they play. For Norway, they were right in that game the entire way. So for Norway, yes, you lose your first game. You're still not expected to do very much. It's a tough loss, especially when you're looking at the relegation format. But for Norway, it's a well-played game and something to definitely build on throughout this tournament. So a good start for both these teams. I thought it was a very well-played game for both sides. And 5-2 is your final, but really could have been a lot closer, I think, the way these two teams played. But very well also could have been a lot higher scoring game for Japan. So in that mind, very well played from both these teams today. And I'll be curious to see throughout the rest of this tournament how both Norway and Japan fare. If Japan can continue to score goals, and for Norway, if they can continue to keep the pace of play up, both those teams you might end up seeing as those top 3 teams in Group B. So that's what we got here for the first game. Move on to the second game of the day. And I think this one was another shocker where we have Sweden winning 2-0 over Hungary. And in this game, it was, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here because Sweden's a weird team because you see them play against Germany yesterday. They played very well against Germany, controlled the majority of play. And then they roll into this game against Hungary. Hungary's a relatively weaker opponent than Germany. And they just kind of don't have that same energy, and they're not able to penetrate the middle of the ice. And all of a sudden, we talked about it yesterday, obviously Hungary is a team who's going to play that trap style very similar to what Germany does. And this kind of game is what I was expecting when we did the prediction video. I had Germany beating Sweden 1-0. this was the kind of game from Sweden that I was expecting to see against Germany in that first game. But we got a very different result from that, of course, the 5-2 victory for Sweden. But at the same time, it was that kind of game where Sweden gets impatient, starts firing pucks into the middle of the ice. Hungary's there, goes back the other way, and gets high-quality chances. You think about how this game ended up playing through, you almost went down early for the Swedes off the head-in goal. But then all of a sudden, you don't have that goal. Obviously, it gets called off, and it's kind of that back and forth. But very well here, you don't score till the end of the second. And this game was a toss-up throughout the entire way. I think Sweden ended up scoring with 5-ish minutes left, if memory serves, in the third period. But at the same time, if you're Sweden, you can't give teams like Hungary a chance in this tournament, because if you let people hang around and you think about who they're going to be coming up and playing, one of the teams that's coming up is Japan, and Japan is one of those teams as well, where if you let them hang around for long enough, they're eventually going to find the back of the net, and they're going to beat you, because that's how they play games. They're able to control the defensive side, and eventually they find that sort of groove, and they find the back of the net in groves. And so for Sweden, for me, this was a disappointing game, I'd say, for them, especially after the big win against Germany, where we saw Germany play very, very well for the most part at times, and you saw them kind of take shifts off. But Sweden outplayed Germany that entire game. And coming into this one, I was expecting more of the same, where we saw Sweden just play to their level. Unfortunately, in this one, they didn't. Went in and got trapped away, basically, in the grand scheme of it. But for Hungary, a team we didn't know too much about coming in, what we were expecting. Obviously, we knew they were a very defensive-minded team. And I will say they definitely had their chances to bury goals today. And we'll see if that becomes the problem for this team moving forward in this tournament, is finding the back of the net. Because very well, for Hungary, they are a team that are going to be able to play that defensive style against some of the better teams at this tournament. It really wouldn't surprise me to see them make the quarterfinal, and then you play teams like Canada or the US, and who knows, maybe you get that sort of World Juniors, that men's World Juniors game where the Czechs always seem to beat Canada because they play that style of hockey. So time will very much tell here. And you even think back to the last World Juniors, for on the World Junior trend with Latvia beating Canada, a very similar way of style. I think Hungary plays a lot similar to that Latvian team at the juniors, where they just kind of trap the game away. They focus on defense first. They hang around for as long as possible, and then they eventually bury that goal. That's that killer goal. I think you might see something very similar if Hungary ends up making the quarterfinals and playing one of the powerhouses like Canada or USA, where we see that trap style start to clog up, and you see the two powerhouses start to get impatient, like we saw with Sweden today. Might be an interesting game, to say the least, in that quarterfinal matchup. But obviously, Hungary still needs to make it, so we will, of course, talk about that at a future date. But that was the second game of the day here with the 2-0 victory for Sweden. We'll move on now to the third game of the day between Canada and Finland. And this was a game that we talked about it, and we'll talk about it in the news section a little bit more. But we like to call it a penciled-in loss for the Finns here, where you're coming off a back-to-back, you're not going to start your best goalie, and we saw that in this game. Obviously, Canada goes up early, 3 goals in the first period, and they kind of just ran away with this game, not really letting Finland in the game. Yes, a little bit more so at the start of the third, where it wasn't a full 60, but by that point, you're up enough goals where you kind of let off the gas a little bit. For Canada, a very good performance today, I thought. You're not going to get too much of that kind of game, I think, especially when you play a team like the US or the Czechs. But very good to see that they are able to play the full 60 minutes, even when they're ahead. Obviously, when you get ahead, you start to get in that mindset of, okay, might as well take some liberties here, might try and score a goal where otherwise I wouldn't. But I do think Canada played a well-played, I might add, 60 minutes of action here against the Finns. And for Finland, not the game you wanted to play is what I'd say. Obviously, it's a tough matchup having to go US and Canada 1-2, but for the Finns, just trying to find any positives. You think back to yesterday, there were a couple positives in that game, but for the most part, obviously, you're playing a tough team, so it's hard to find a lot of them. But for the Finns today, I'd say quite a few less positives than before. We'll see if they're able to right the ship. Obviously, they got a couple big games coming up in Group A, most notably the one against the Czechs coming up. I will say that game is going to probably determine who comes third in the group, getting to play a team either probably Sweden or Japan, depending on how the standings end up now. With Germany obviously already losing to Sweden, puts a little bit of a wrench into the standings. But I would say Sweden right now is looking like the top of Group B, just the way we've seen them play. Yes, they got a tighter margin win today against Hungary, but based off what we've seen so far with all the other teams, I do expect them to now win the group. Just because of that win against Germany. I think very well similarly, if Germany would have won that game, I think Germany still would have been the top of the group. So an interesting one there for the Finns, because obviously you play third, you get the quote-unquote weaker opponent. Then there's also the Swiss team, who we'll see if they're able to pull off any upsets here. I think any win against Finland or Czechia would be considered an upset. So for the Finns, just continuing to find some positives after a tough schedule. They're going to rewrite the ship now, flip the book, whatever you want to call it, as they do now look ahead to the rest of this tournament after a tough start. But time will tell if they're able to do that. On to the news we go with Norway, who is a very competitive team. And I think in many ways you play against Japan, and Japan's always a team that just kind of skates circles around you for most of the game. A lot of energy. And they play the game at a very fast pace. And for Norway, I was curious to see how well they'd keep up with that. And I have to say they kept up with it really well. And you look to the rest of the teams at this tournament, you look at a team like Hungary, where I think if Norway plays the way they did today, I think they have a decent shot at beating Hungary now, especially just the way Hungary plays, where they're very defensive-minded. When you see those defensive-minded teams have to take control of the game, that's when you see gaps start to open up. So for Hungary, and for Norway for that matter, I think Norway's a team that will be able to find that groove, especially against Hungary, who's kind of going to be in that range of, I don't know whether to force or whether to play that defensive style that they play so well. So that's one that I am interested to see in that Norway-Hungary game, to see what goes on there. But also for Hungary, a solid performance today. Next we go on to Japan with they are ready to go. And the biggest question mark coming into this tournament was, would they be able to score goals? And that 5 number tells you everything you need to know. They are ready to go. As for Sweden, the net is Hungary. Okay. For Sweden today, obviously you come off a pretty good performance against the Germans, not scoring them as many goals as you would like against Hungary, but you still get the win 2-0 fashion, so can never complain about a good defensive game of hockey. Then to Hungary we go with heads up, obviously with the head in goal as the part of the pun for that one, but for Hungary, lots to keep your head up about, right? They played a very good game against a tough Swedish team today. And when you look to the rest of this tournament, I think Hungary will be a team that is going to surprise some people here today, and the rest of the way here. They're a team that just plays a very solid style, a defensive structured game that we normally see from the top teams at the tournament, like a Finland, most notably, who tends to play that trappy kind of style, where teams like that, those North American teams that are so used to continued success, or even a Sweden team who's so used to continued success at a tournament, just finds ways to have some problems with, because they're not used to being in close, tight defensive games like we're so used to seeing. So for Hungary, lots to keep your head up about today. We'll see if they can continue that. As for Finland, we kind of already touched on it, but the death start, you play the US, you play Canada. It's time to rewrite the book, see what you can do for the rest of this tournament. As for Canada, another strong start here. And you play a Finnish team, always a tough Finnish team to play against, because they are very similar to the Hungary. They play a very defensive style of hockey, and they're able to find gaps in the Canadian game. So with that in mind, they played a good game today, got the shutout. 5-0 is your final in that one. Move on now to the standings, and we have Of course, in Group A, 3 teams tied for first with the US, Czechs, and Canada. Switzerland's in fourth with 1 regulation loss, and Finland is in last place and 5th place in Group A with 2 regulation losses. As for Group B, Sweden is in first place with 2 regulation wins. They're at 6 points. Japan with 1 regulation win at 3 points. Norway, Hungary, and Germany all tied for 3rd, 4th, and 5th place in Group B with 1 regulation loss each. A reminder that the bottom 2 teams do get relegated at this tournament, and it's something to keep in mind because they are going to get rid of this format in the next tournament. So that those bottom 2 teams getting relegated, it's not like the other tournaments like in the men's side where it's only one team playing in a game, the 2 teams play in a game. It's both teams get relegated. So those bottom 2 spots are crucial for teams to try and get out of. Those top 3 places are very important, especially for these countries to be a part of the next tournament. Look for a lot of desperation over these next few days in Group B, especially amongst Norway, Hungary, and Germany now too, who are now in danger of being relegated. Move on now to the schedule for tomorrow's games, and we have 3 games on the slate, starting here at 5 a.m. between Japan and Hungary. And this is a game I am very excited to watch because Japan is a team notorious for controlling the pace of play, and Hungary, who is very defensive-minded trap-style play. And I'm very excited to see if Hungary is able to capitalize on Japan's mistakes. We've seen it in years past where all of a sudden there's a lot of giveaways from Japan and they move up the ice and Hungary scores on those rushes. I'll be curious to see tomorrow whether that's the case or if Japan is able to control the pace of play and win a tight game like they're so used to doing. I don't think Japan is going to get panicky being in a tight game because they are used to playing those tight games. But I do expect them to start to realize, this could be a problem, especially if they can't score early. Look for Hungary to take control of this game because they are well known for that defensive style. And when defensive styles get tight, especially late in hockey games, a lot of mistakes happen. So that's coming up at 5 a.m. I think that's going to be my game of the day along with the last game, but we'll talk about that one in a few minutes here. Then on to Canada and Switzerland at 9 a.m. I don't expect this one to be too pretty. I think Canada will dominate the majority of play here. But we'll see because the Swiss team is always a weird one where they might get a hot hand early and they'll continue that. I don't expect it to be close, but you really never know at this tournament because anything can happen. So that's at 9 a.m. And then the other game of the day is the U.S. against the host Czechs at 1 o'clock p.m. And this Czech team is going to be an interesting one, I think, at this tournament. You think about what they got. They got the home crowd behind them. They got a good rising team ahead of them. They're playing against a tough U.S. team who makes mistakes every so often, and we'll see if the Czechs are able to capitalize on that. Think back to the earlier game for the Czechs. They played well, but they made a few mistakes here and there. We'll see if they can clean that up because if the Czechs start making mistakes against the U.S., it will end up in the back of their net. So I'm interested to see here for the Czechs what kind of game they bring against a tough U.S. team. For the U.S., I'm curious to see how many mistakes end up in the back of their net. Something to keep an eye on. This game is not a lock. I know a lot of people have had this game written off. The U.S. and Canada will both walk through Group A until they play each other. This Czech game is one that I am keeping a very heavy eye on because this one is not a lock. Do not be surprised to see this be a close game, but also do not be surprised to see it be a blowout because that's the one beautiful part about this tournament is it really just comes down to who brings their game on what day. And it wouldn't surprise me to see the Czechs take it if they bring their game and the U.S. gets caught sleeping a little bit. But that will wrap it up for the scheduled programming. Now we are going to go to live questions. If you haven't already, be sure to follow me on the fly 1515 for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. We do put out a poll at the end of every day asking for your thoughts and questions on the day's games. We have one question today from Nick, the Iihf fan, who says, "Welcome to the Women's World's Jennifer Gardner. What a debut. Of the 6 teams that played today, I think the 2 newly promoted teams had the 2 most notable performances today. Norway played rather well versus Japan, but I think Japan's endurance ended up being the difference. Meanwhile, Hungary-Sweden was easily the most fun game of the 3 today, with the Hungarians not letting Sweden run away with it at any point." And I think that's exactly right. And you think about, the Gardner early performance. Obviously, it's a good sign for Canada. You get players going early, especially for those who are new to the tournament. So that's always a good sign, especially for a Canadian team who's trying to get all their players going early. But for the rest of the teams, you think about Japan and you think about Norway. Norway looked really good. Japan looked pretty good as well, finding the back of the net. Always a concern for them at this tournament. As for Hungary and Sweden, Hungary puts a real solid performance today against a very tough Swedish team, and it just goes to show the rising level of women's hockey, especially in that competitive range. And as they start to dissolve this Group A, Group B into a standard snake format, I'm excited to see these kind of teams play each other in the round robin, because I think you think about just how far this game has grown. It's not a lock like it once was. And I think for a team like a Hungary, if they play Canada today and the way they played Sweden, I think that game would be a lot closer than a lot of people thought. So with that in mind, obviously another great day of hockey, a lot of interesting games, a lot of surprises, but also the winners were expected to win these games and in regulation. So on the score sheet, on the standings board, no surprises. On the actual scoreboard, a couple surprises. But with that, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like, if you realize you're subscribing, tell all your friends and comment down below your thoughts on day 2 of the Women's World Championship. Until next time, see you.